They should be familiar with this from Fadden, so that should help you too.
They should be familiar. And so, and good morning, students. I just started recording. Mr. Rooks is going to be with us for this, and so they should be. And so, you tell me at the end of the lesson whether this is something they should have some familiarity with. I think everybody should have some familiarity with this anyway. All right, so today we are going to take a look at community structure. We have the illustrious Mr. Rooks here to serve as in your role, so we can have a little banter. And so we're really going to focus on three questions. The first really is, what is a community, right? So if we're going to study community structure, we probably ought to know what a community is just initially before we even think about anything else. Second, what does it mean to be a member of a community? So if you're a member of the community, what really identifies you as a member of said community? Is there only one community, or can you have several communities within a community? And are you a member of each of those or none of them? What does that really mean? And then finally, the third, what roles are you playing within that community? So if you're a member of a community, a member of any group, you have a role. So what roles are at play whenever you're within that community? Are you working with someone? Are you working in isolation to support others from a distance? There's always roles within any kind of membership. And so we're going to kind of look and center our thoughts on these three questions today. So first, what is a community in the first place? And so I'm literally going to Webster's dictionary for this one, right? So it says a social group of any size. So we're talking about two or more that reside in a specific locality or have a shared government or have a common cultural or historical heritage. So maybe let's put some examples to these. So you can have a social structure, right? Some social structures. You can have structure. I'm referring back to structure. I'm talking about communities. So social community, a religious community, there's occupational communities, so like teachers, and then educational communities like you guys. And then we're going to study ecological, but I'm going to avoid that today, and we'll explore this last one when we come back on Wednesday, when we see you guys on Wednesday. So let's think about social communities, as I think that's probably what you're going to be the most familiar with. And in this case, let's focus on really this being the definition. Let's focus on some really key parts here. There's some sharing that has to be here. So people have to have some shared values. These values or these attitudes or these points of view are kind of shared amongst the group. People generally accept these things as being true or the norms for the group. And then what keeps the fabric of this community from disintegrating and keeps people networked together and knitted together would be some rules. And those rules out of those rules are going to be, there's going to be some group dynamics and some identity. So when people walk by and they see said person, they're going to be like, oh, wow, that person is part of this community. I mean, you're identifiable. I know that this person's part of this. So let's take a look at those two. So social communities, let's think about gaming. Do you know if somebody's a gamer when you see them? Kind of look familiar. Some of you guys may have experiences at home. You have a screen where there's a patchwork of people, and gamers usually have something. They have little brands that they wear, a shirt that they wear, headphones that they wear. You know that they're part of that community. And these people all operate on the same rules. Rooks, do you play games?
Yep, just holding up my controller. So there you go. There's an example.
Oh my God! See, perfect. He is part of the community. Can you identify somebody in the gaming community just walking around?
I mean, they're probably gonna have, or it depends on the day, but like a lot of them are either gonna have shirts or, I mean, in basic conversation, it'll probably come up if they do it, frequently, or that's a major part of their lives.
Okay. Sports, and probably a lot of you guys could identify people in the sports community. I know Yolanda Palacios, like, well, absolutely. When I see this person, I know they're part of the sports community. They've got the right shoes or shirt or attitude. It's just that norm that I'm a part of, that I recognize. I'm part of their community. So these are some students, or some maybe they're not necessarily students. I'm assuming they are by their age demographic, but playing soccer. And people that are soccer players usually will recognize soccer players. Clubs and hobbies. There we go. This is the club that I'll be a part of in the next 15 years, the Old Man Club, playing dominoes. I'm down with that. I'm going to be looking forward to being part of that community. Um, and then political communities. So that by this being almost a pretty bifurcated group of people, this being Congress, but there is a set of social norms within political structure. But these are all communities, and these people all recognize, understand one another, have roles within there, and function. These communities function. Let's look at a religious community. Maybe you're a part of a religious community. So we have Islam. So again, a set of rules, norms, identities. You wouldn't confuse this group for another group. Christians, these being Protestants, it looks as though they're Protestants, all praying together and looking as though that they all recognized whatever rule. They're kind of looking in the same general direction. They kind of have a stance that they're sharing. While it doesn't seem as formal as Islam, you can recognize one another and they have a role. Hinduism, again, people observing a set of norms, rules, roles. They're part of a group of people that share a faith. And then finally, Judaism, we have here a group of people that are praying at the Wailing Wall outside of Solomon's Temple or Temple of the Mount, depending on which group people that you belong to who have a held belief. Nevertheless, these are religious communities. Occupational communities, plumbers. These are groups of people that do the same thing, recognize the same principles or practices within their work, unionize to have more collective bargaining power, and they get together and they form a community. Agricultural workers, you have people that will get together, decide we're part of a group of people that we can organize. We have a shared common goal. We have roles to meet that goal, and they make a movement. Attorneys, bar associations, people that say you have to operate within these rules to observe the law, to practice the law. These are communities. And then finally, social workers. And they will also form associations so that everybody operates the same way with the same set of rules and norms and roles and supportive and have this network of people that can assert action. These give structure to groups of people. Finally, let's look at educational communities. Primary, you can recognize this, little kids sitting around working towards a common situation, common goal. High schools, a little less formal most of the time. They don't need as much structure. They give themselves structure because they recognize the roles that they need to occupy for this to work correctly. College, even less structure. You're moving around. People are self-governing and they expect those around them to self-govern so that they can meet their objectives. And then finally, vocational. There's vocational communities within educational communities. These are people that are all working together to learn in some way. In some way, it looks as though this is probably an SEC mechanic, classroom, and everybody there is working towards these common goals and norms. So, what educational communities have you been a part of, Mr. Brooks?
Primary, high school, and college. Even like in graduate school, I was on like separate community and separate culture.
Did you ever join any academic or social fraternities?
Yeah, so like I was vice president of Phi Alpha Theta History Honor Society. We had a graduate social society, stuff like that.
Yeah, and there was a set of, we used to have our meetings at, what is that pizza joint down the street from here? Mama's Pizza. We used to meet at Mama's Pizza for our meetings, and it was kind of nice. It was a little less, formal. We could sit around, get something to eat, visit with one another, and all talk shop. It was a community where we all understood one another, mine being biology, yours being history, and people that have these common shared interests. So All communities are going to possess a few things. And I keep harking back to this idea of structure. And I want you to think of structure as equaling relationships. So if I say structure or I say relationship, these two words could be interchangeable for one another. But to have a relationship, you've got to have there's going to be certain types. So relationships could include competition. They could include mutual support. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. You need help, I need help. We help one another. This goes really back to these communities. Everybody here working and helping one another. But sometimes there's going to be competition as well. Oh man, competition as well. Well, that may not necessarily be help per se, but it could be helping the structure overall. And then sometimes there's support without repayment. There's no reciprocation of this. I'm going to support people just because that's my role. I don't expect anything back from them. And then there are also leaders within these groups. Sometimes there's going to be a leader within a group. So, Mr. Rooks, do you see this working out in your classroom in any kind of way?
Yeah, like especially when we were, in a regular year and we used to do like pods and stuff like that, there would naturally be that one kid who's going to be the one who tends to speak up more often. Or if I tell, each pod to work on something, there's typically going to be that one student who kind of not necessarily does the work, but kind of starts everyone off and gets them going, gets people talking. Um, so that's kind of how I see it in my class.
Yeah, and I can see this within a classroom as well. There's going to be people that are competing to make sure that, oh, I'm going to get a higher grade on a test, I'm going to get a higher grade on this. No, you're not. I'm going to do this. And I see a lot of mutual support, people that are friends within these groups that are supporting one another, and just by students asking questions, other students hear those questions and maybe never thought of that question, thought, oh my God, that's a really good question, I'm glad I got the answer, or I was afraid to hear that question. And then they support one another. And then there's going to be some people that are just altruistic, that just want to be the person to support other people without any hope of repayment. They're just people that like being, you know, honest, sincere, thoughtful. So these are what these relationships are. These are the behaviors and outcomes for these relationships. So in competition, this competition here is going to lead to a rivalry, and that's going to lead to stronger individuals. So your pack or your group or your community will have stronger individuals who could potentially become leaders later on because they have some sense of competition, which pushes them to get better. You have mutual support. You have those that are sharing, and by sharing, this leads to cooperation. And that cooperation can lead to a sense of trust as well as empathy. You've been there. You've felt that way. You've done this. You've made that mistake. You've corrected that mistake. You're working to show that to somebody else, so they don't have to learn by making their own trial and errors or making their own mistake through trial and error, but they're learning through you. And the same thing with repayment. We'll probably pair those two ideas. And then leadership leads to focus. Like Mr. Rooks had mentioned, he'll have a group of students, they're working in a pod, there'll be a person that naturally rises in that group and drives that group, keeps it in focus, keeps it with a sense of purpose. We have an objective and we hit that. So communities are going to possess these structures, which are essentially are analogous to relationships, and those relationships are going to lead to these behaviors, and these behaviors give you these outcomes. This is what a community really is. So let's apply game theory for just a moment. So here, I'll move Mr. Rooks out of the way so we can see this a little better. I have this is a grid here, this little grid, this little dynamic of these bats. And essentially what these are, and this is actually how it works. And this is a game theory. So we're talking about in science theories or facts. We've got these are vampire bats as an example for this game theory. And it's also called Prisoner's Dilemma. You guys can look this up. It's a really fun game to play with one another if you're ever kind of considering it, but this should make a lot of sense. So here in this You have different scenarios, and we'll call this quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. I have a bat, and this is what they're doing. Bats will fly out every night, and they will go and they'll find an animal and they'll drink their blood. They'll fill their belly, their gut full of blood, and fly back to their roost in the morning, and they'll sleep all day. But when you fly around looking for an animal to actually, sleeping animal to feed on, sometimes you're successful and sometimes you're not. And most often you're not. Bats will go out and will not find a meal. So this is their social dilemma, or their dilemma every night, and they have a way to solve this problem. Some are better at this than others. So let's look at this scenario. So here you can see this bat A is going to share and bat B are going to share. You remember fitness is your ability to survive and leave offspring. So 1 being 100%, you live, they're 0.9, so that would be 90%. Bat B and bat A here in this scenario in quadrant 2, well, bat A doesn't share, but bat A is going to be at full. See that beautiful bat? Full, loving it. Got plenty of food, but bat B dies. Well, that's a fitness of 1. 100% you live, bat B is going to die. And this is from an individualistic point of view. In this case, bat A shares, bat B doesn't share, bat B lives, bat A dies. And here, neither of them share, and they stay fairly slim. And so you can see by their body, they stay fairly slim. While they may not starve like this bat or this bat, they stay fairly slim, and so they're not very healthy, and such as their eyes reflect. So let's do a little math. So which community works best here? And what would you say, Mr. Rooks?
So if we just look at it from an individual standpoint, bat A or bat B can be pretty happy on their own, but in reality, we work as communities. So that first scenario where they're both pretty healthy, they can also get more than just food from each other, cooperation. What if one bat gets sick, but they're already used to sharing? That other bat can give food. So to me, that first scenario where everyone's sharing tends to be better for the community.
Yeah, and you got to understand, this is just an example of one night, right? So like you said, you could get sick. And what do you do when you get sick? Well, or you get injured, like I got in a car accident. Well, in the United States, we have unemployment insurance through the government, so that they give you a little money so that while you're getting back on your feet, you don't starve to death, right? So this is a community. And so this is just an example of one night. And it could be that bat A or bat B, or like you say, could get hurt. So let's take a look. Well, quadrant 1, we've got these fitness levels of these bats. So I got 0.9 plus 0.9 equals 1.8, and there's 2 bats, so we divide by 2. So the average, or the mean fitness for this group, stays at 0.9. So they're 90% healthy, so to speak. Their probability of survival is about 90% throughout the year. Quadrant 2, I got 1.0 plus 0 equals 1. So 1 plus nothing equals 1, right? Divided by 2, these bats have a 50% fitness level. So let's just equate that to survival, so to speak. 50% as likely to survive as opposed to 90%. Quadrant 1 sounds good to me. I think you're on the right track there, Mr. Rooks. Quadrant 3, 0, 1. 1 is great, but you're dividing it by 2 and you're back to 50%. So this is where 1 shares and 1 doesn't, right? In these 2 quadrants, quadrant 2 and 3. Quadrant 4, the lowest fitness, no cooperation whatsoever. Everybody's an individual. I'll stand on my own. I'll pull myself up by my bootstraps, so to speak. No problem. I don't need anybody. 0.4. So which is the best? Which community works best? Well, without a doubt, it looks like 1 so far. So let's look at this in a slightly different way. Share plus share equals 90%. Doesn't share plus share equals 50%. Share plus doesn't share equals 50%. And doesn't doesn't share. So no sharing, 40% fitness. So your fitness will decrease. So which one's best? Well, no doubt. It is quadrant one. Quadrant one wins in this scenario. It's always better to cooperate than defect. It's always better to cooperate than not cooperate. It's always better to share than not sharing. It's always better to be a member of a community than not a member of a community. You have the support and structure you need to operate. Everything needs to have structure to work. So let's take a look. What communities do you belong to? So Mr. Rooks, what communities do you belong to?
Well, I live in the United States, so I belong to that community. I work at Summit, so I belong to that teaching community. Um, I would still argue I'm part of an educational community because I still cooperate with students, even though I'm the teacher. So there's some examples.
Oh, okay, great. So do you know what roles that you play within those communities?
Yeah, for the most part, like within my larger society, I'm a worker who contributes taxes and buys goods. So I play that role. At Summit, I am a teacher, so I'm supposed to lead students but cooperate with other teachers.
Okay, okay. And I would say, yes, we're both of us are adults, so we're full members with full rights in this society. We can vote. We observe the laws. I don't run red lights, it's most of the time, and get in terrible car accidents. I I cut my yard so that my neighbor doesn't his property value stays high, and he cuts his yard so his property value stays high. And if we both do that, our property values collectively stay high. We keep our properties looking nice because we're part of this community in which I live in, this neighborhood in which I live in, and we keep our homes looking nice. We don't leave Christmas lights hanging on them all year long, so it looks terrible. And our community, micro community, stays strong. So doing my job at my house supports my neighbor's house, and if they ever have a problem, then I go over there or they come over to mine. And that is a quick little example of an outcome of us having a safe neighborhood where our property values stay relatively high, and our kids can play in all of our yards and not have much of an issue. So let's go to today's guided practice. I'm gonna go to Schoology. That's where Mr. Rooks wants to be. Oh yeah, he's like, I want to go to Schoology at 8 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. Hold on a second.
During spring break, it's fun.
I've actually worked quite a bit, Mr. Rooks. Not as much as I had planned to, but I've worked. Yeah, I've worked quite a bit. I was really thinking about how I was going to do this for these kids because by the way, kids, I have to teach you something else, and this is going to set the stage for that you can understand. By the way, I've reorganized you'll notice when you come here, you got your 3 units and kind of all put together and neat instead of having all these out here, all these in a sequence. So now evolution, taxonomy, and we're starting ecology. This is our asynchronous lesson. It's really nice. Click on this. And when you go there, I've got a document for you. And you'll just submit it, but I want to go over the power terms. Power terms. Let's see. And Mr. Brooks, you can see the document?
Yes.
Okay. So before we go any further, let's look at and answer this question. What roles do you play in your community? Which could be different than mine or the same as mine and Mr. Rooks and any other class members, but it could be different as well. There's some command terms. And so there's identify, justify, describe. These are 3. I want you to pay attention because this is where you're going to score points. So every time you see a verb, there's a mark to be earned. So identify, that is state the identity of an object. There is Mr. Richard Rooks. I have identified Mr. Rooks almost. I would, to really fully state or identify Mr. Rooks, I would say Mr. Rooks is a teacher at Summit International Preparatory in Arlington, Texas. I have just identified it. That was one sentence, right? So to identify something is you can do it in one sentence, but you're going to give the identity. You're going to say, this is what this is. To justify, it's a little better. It's a little different. It's a little more thoughtful. I love this. Giving a reason for a fact. So Mr. Rooks is a teacher. That was who I said. Mr. Rooks' identity is that of a teacher at Summit. So I need to justify this, right? So I would say, Mr. Rooks is a teacher at Summit International Preparatory. My justification for this is he is licensed by the state or certified by the state to teach. He has passed the exams needed in pedagogical exams to teach, as well as the content for his subject area, which is going to be history or social sciences. I'm not entirely sure what your certification is, but I'm given reasons that he is a part of that situation, or that's who he is. I'm not just saying that's what he is. I'm also given a reason, a justification for what he is. And so that's justifying. You're given a reason. And this can be done in 3 sentences. This has to have a minimum of 3 sentences to get this mark. To get this point, you need a minimum of 3 sentences. So in this first scenario, identify and justify, it says identify a community in which you belong. Justify your membership in that community. So you'll go in here and she'll talk about your roles or the norms that you guys all have together. What in that role, are you the leader? Are you offering mutual support? What is it that you are doing that is identifying you as that member, that justifies or gives a reason that you are in fact a member of that society? So like Yolanda is a really, she's part of the athletic community, the sports community at the school. Well, justify that. Well, she has a relationship with Coach Davis. She practices, she runs. I see her after school. She studies so that she can get the grades to be able to continue to be a part of that community, because that's a qualifier for that community. You go in and give some reasons. And then 2, identify 2 roles. So you're coming in here and you're taking whatever these roles are and you're going to identify those and justify each of those roles. So in this case, what is the justification? Why do those rules lead to outcomes? What is that, or what was that role? What outcome does that play? So in this case, Mr. Rooks is a teacher. I've justified him by having license. But he has roles that he plays. And in this case, he facilitates instruction, he delivers the instruction, he organizes the class, and by organizing the class and coming to work every day and having this set of expertise, students are able to learn more about history and become better, well-rounded citizens of our country, so they're not confused. And whenever it comes time to vote, they know how and why they should register to vote. So these are justifications for those roles. And then describe the outcomes. What are the outcomes of your roles? We haven't really got to, I started to allude to that then, but there's going to be an outcome for that role. So you hold this role, you do something, but how does that support the community? So let's just use Yolanda again. Yolanda is a basketball player, part of the sports community at Summit. I can justify their membership for this because I see them doing at games, she practices and things of that nature. Those 2 situations, she practices, she's studying in order to be part of that community, it's going to, excuse me. I see her I'm identifying those 2 roles. I'm justifying those things. Those things are important because those are qualifiers that she needs to keep in order to maintain membership within that community and be in the good graces of coach and her team members. The outcomes for those, so she's practicing, she's studying the plays, she's keeping her grades up so she can participate, leads to the role where her team is cohesive. Her team knows they have support of one another. They go to meets. When they have these meets or these games, they win. If they don't win, because of the nature of this practicing together, they feel supported and they're not devastated by that loss. They learn from that loss. There's a lot of things here that you could say. I want you to really pay attention to the verbs. And I really never got on this last one, this command term. Give an example of how a cause has an effect. That's the outcome. To describe is to give an example. Tell me what that effect is. I lost, but I'm not devastated. I won and I'm satisfied. I have the support of my member and of these members to make me feel fulfilled within that group. This is all you have to do. It's not too taxing. So there's 4 sentences plus 8 sentences here because you're doing identifying 2 roles and justifying those. So that's 4 and 8. That's 12. And then here's a little more thoughtful. You're going to be having some descriptions. There's 6. So a total of 18 sentences. I'm going to pay attention to this, right? You guys know me by now. I'm going to read this. Surprise. And you'll get marks for every one of these. So 1, 2, and here's 2 identified. So that's 3, 4, and you're going to justify each. That's 5, 6, and then 7. So for every one of these, and these are 2 roles, you're identifying, 8, because these are 2 roles here. So if that is a total of 8, so 100 divided by 8 is 12. So each one of these that you get correct is 12 marks, 12 points. You get all 8 of them, you get 100. Easiest 100 you ever had to do. You just have to think about yourself. All right. What questions do you have, Mr. Rooks?
I guess you talk about the minimum sentences. Could I use more if I feel like I need more? Like, what if I don't feel like I've described the roles in 6 sentences effectively?
Oh, Rand, you can write as much as you want. Make me suffer. Make me suffer. Make me read about you. Actually, I'm looking very forward to reading this so I get to know the students a little better. It gives me insight into them, and they're going to get insight into themselves, and it'll give them context for the next lesson. The next lesson, they need to have this context to understand very well what we're going to be doing. Is that the only question you had, really?
You were pretty effective. I'm following it pretty well.
Oh, well, I'm glad. Thank you so much. I did not want to do this by myself because I would have been miserable talking to a screen. And then I would have, if there had been a glaring, gap, you could show me, right? And this is the part of the community that we belong to. When I don't operate within a society, within a community of educators or students, and I would consider them educating me, I see our role as being a very reciprocal role. I feed off the kids, and if the kids are doing well, I do well. If the kids don't do well, I get sad, right? And so I needed the context of another person here. These asynchronous lessons are not my favorite thing in the world. I think I'd rather eat the chair I'm in. I'd rather teach students, right? And I'd much rather be in person than on a computer.
Well, that's why we get frustrated when no one participates even in person, because then we're just talking to a wall and it doesn't go as well, because when you're just hearing yourself talk, you don't have that interaction. You could be saying utter nonsense, but you're thinking, oh, this made total sense, until you have that feedback from even students.
Yeah, if I'm not understood, then then I'm not effective. If I'm not being effective, why am I doing this? I want to be as effective as possible. Okie doke. All right, I'm gonna stop recording. And hold on, I say I'm gonna stop recording. We'll see in a minute.